Okay, we finished last time with looking at the work of Trajan. We're going to move on to Hadrian now. And there's a beginning a change in how the emperors portray themselves. Um, Hadrian now shows himself to be more like a philosopher. His hair is a little bit longer. He's growing a beard, and he wears a toga instead of military outfit. So um, there's a bit of a change in the emperors, especially in the good emperors. All right, so we're going to look at the Pantheon now, and I want you to know the difference between the Parthenon and the Pantheon. Parthenon was Greek. Pantheon is Roman. And so the Pantheon was built by Agrippa, and it burned down and fell apart. Then it was rebuilt by Agrippa Domitian, and it burned down and fell apart. And then the third time that it was built, it stayed up, and that was done by Hadrian. The word pantheon means all the gods, and it is the best preserved ancient Roman monument. The Romans copied everything. They copied the gods, they copied art, they copied temples, they copied everything. The one thing that the Romans excelled in was architecture, especially with the creation of concrete. And the Pantheon is the most distinctly Roman piece of architecture. And they discovered that bricks and mortar are far more versatile than marble. So here is a view of what it would have looked like at the time that it was created. A couple things I want to point out. It had a bronze roof. The bronze is gone now, and it had a big courtyard in front of it. And it has this entryway. The portico is where the entrance was. One thing I want to point out is notice that this roof right here does not quite match up here. It was originally intended for it to go up, be a little bit taller, but the columns were not tall enough to make this happen. And these columns are different than the columns I showed you in Greek art. Remember how they stacked the columns as drums? These columns right here, each column is a single piece of stone. So you cannot stack stuff on top of it if you want to keep it a single piece of stone. And these were taken from Egypt. So these were, when they went and conquered Egypt, they stole these columns and brought them back and built the Pantheon with these columns. So that is why you see this triangle right here and then the triangle of the pediment down below it. It was originally supposed to match up. All right, here's a drawing of what it would have looked like at the time, and then we can see a different view of it. But it's the inside and how it was built that concerns us the most. The interior, the semicircle of above is the same distance from the height and the width are the same distance in every direction. So it was made to fit a giant sphere on the inside, an imaginary sphere. And then the area around it is a cylinder. And then the portico is a cube. And then the entryway right up here, that is like a prism shape. So there's a lot of geometry in the Pantheon. James, put your phone down, eyes up on the screen. And this is a very different building than the basilica that we've seen before. So the basilica here has these different, like, I guess, rooms or areas with the apse on one side. It's mostly rectangular, but the Pantheon right here is completely different than previous Roman architecture. Once again, it is a cylinder that holds up the dome. And what it reminds me of is we have a dome on top of a cylinder, kind of like the trash cans that you see around. All right. The more expensive stone is on the bottom, and then as it goes higher, it gets less expensive. And then we have these niches that are on the insides of um, uh, the temple, and you have these very thick walls, except for where the niches are. But the area between the niches is quite thick. It was planned that way, and also the when you're standing in it, you can see the stone that's next to you better than the stone that's way up high. So you can kind of fake it up there, and when you're looking at it, you're up close, and so that's where they have the most expensive stuff. That's a good question. All right, and then on the outer edge, there's these arches around on the outer wall, and these arches help to divert the gravity of the and the weight of the walls down into these almost like these hidden pillars, so that it does not collapse. So it's a way to keep the shape and keep the strength of it. On the inside, there would have been statues of the different gods and goddesses. You can see Mars, Sol, which is the sun, and there's Saturn and Venus, Mercury, and so on. The same thing with the area of the dome. It has the more expensive materials down towards the bottom. It's much thicker, and as it goes up, it gets thinner and uses less expensive material. Again, it is thicker at the base of the dome than it is at the top of the dome, and this is to help the weight. If they kept the same thickness all the way up, it would have caved in at the top. So this is a way to keep it from caving in. On the inside, these are called coffers. Coffers are they carve out parts of the wall or in the ceiling to lessen the weight of it. So these vertical bars are carrying the weight, but these uh, concave portions help take some of that weight out, so it's not as heavy up on the dome. And then on the outside, it doesn't look much like a dome at all. You know, it had on the inside, it is almost completely spherical, but on the outside, it just looks like a bump on the top. There are these bands across here. So before I talk about the bands, the gravity is pushing down. And as gravity pushes down, it pushes the weight out. And it is the bands that are holding it in. So if the bands were not there, it is quite likely that the inner dome would have caved in. We have the same thing on the outside. These massive, thick walls on the outside are helping to push all that force in to keep it from crumbling and falling out, because the force of gravity is pushing these walls out. In the top of the Pantheon, there's what they call an oculus. Write that term down: Oculus, oculus. It is an empty hole. It is not a window. When it rains, water falls on the floor and it lets the light in, but it also saves weight and it makes it stronger. If this dome was completely closed at the top, it would be less secure. So for some reason, this open spot at the top keeps it from coming in, and it kind of works like a keystone at the top of a an arch. All the pressure is pushing in, and it holds its shape as a circle at the top. Uh, this slide should have been back a little bit. It's a close-up view of the coffers. And like I was telling you about the columns of the Pantheon, the columns are one solid piece of stone, as opposed to drums stacked on top of each other. So this is what it looks like on the inside, and I want to share with you that as the sun moves across the sky, the light inside of the oculus moves as well. And there is one particular uh, day. It is November 21st. The sun shines on the front door, and that is the anniversary of Rome's founding, November 21st. So they designed the Pantheon for the sun to shine at a certain spot on a certain day, which I think is takes a crazy, amazing math to figure that out. Okay, moving on. This is what it looks like on the outside. During the Middle Ages, it was used as a church. You can see the church bells that were added. They've been since taken off. And then here you can see it on the outside from another rooftop. On the inside, there are false windows, like right here, around on that side. All right, moving on. It was Apollo of Damascus that is the architect the uh, um, of the Pantheon, and Apollo of Damascus was also the architect of the Forum of Trajan, the Markets of Trajan, the Column of Trajan. He was a very important architect for Trajan, and he created the Pantheon for Hadrian, and Hadrian kept asking him for more domes. And so he said, "Why do you want all your buildings to look like pumpkin domes?" And Hadrian didn't like that comment, so he literally commanded, or he commanded Apollodorus to literally kill himself. All right, next we're going to look at Antoninus Pius is the next of the five good emperors. I think you, is this Chase Farrell? All right, he was the most normal of all the emperors. In fact, he was super normal. Normal to a point where it ceased to be normal. He was very respectful to everybody. He never killed any of the other senators. He was in charge of Rome's best economy ever, and he had very simple tastes. He didn't spend too much money, and he was sober. He did not drink alcohol, and so that normalcy made him weird among the senators. Right? It's all subjective. Anyways, his wife died after his third year as emperor, and he was absolutely devastated. So he created an artwork in her honor. Uh, on the column of Antoninus Pius, the column is since gone. So the column is gone. We still have the base, and we're going to look at the base. On the base, this is Antoninus Pius. This is his wife. And this figure right here is called a genius. And the genius is taking Antoninus and his wife up to heaven. The figure in the lower left is an allegory. He is a personification of Campus Martius, which is the area that Antoninus and his wife lived in, the part of Rome. Then on the right is the Rome. Rome is personified, and she is approving of Antoninus and his wife going up to heaven. And on her shield, she has the Capitoline wolf that is feeding Romulus and Remus. And I told you guys that story. So this picture is called the apotheosis. Write that down, apotheosis. And when you're done writing down apotheosis, write down decursio. All right, and apotheosis is an image of somebody being ascending into heaven. So that is what is going on here. This is the apotheosis. All right, let's take a look at the decursio. This is a military horse procession, and notice the use of space. We're looking down on it as a bird's eye view, but we're not seeing the tops of their heads and the tops of their shoulders. So then it's a profile view. So it's a bird's eye view and a profile view all at the same time. This was not conceived of as a window. So it's almost as if everybody has laid down on the ground. So in the military horse procession, the Roman soldiers are in the middle carrying their standards, and then the horse procession goes around them. But the view of this is like we're looking straight out at them, but then we're also looking down at them, and it's all mixed up. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a video game I played in my youth called Robotron. By the way, the sounds in this are completely obnoxious. All right, so this has the same viewpoint as the decursio, where you're looking down on it and across at it at the same time. All right, and that is completely obnoxious. All right, so we are going to move on. All right, and I want you to know what an equestrian statue is. Has anybody seen this one before? This is here in Houston. Oh, is that the one? Yeah, it's the one by the zoo. All right, so and there's a close up of it. An equestrian statue typically shows a heroic figure mounted on a horse and in some kind of heroic pose. So we're going to take a look at the equestrian sculpture of Marcus Aurelius. And this was the original placement of it. There's a copy of it now, and it has been moved into a museum. And here you can see the scale of this. This is the only equestrian statue of this size to survive antiquity. There were dozens of equestrian sculptures in Rome. They are all gone except for this one. So his right arm is out addressing the troops. The palm is facing down. That means that the emperor is about to speak. Or it could be a gesture of clemency towards the enemy. That means clemency means forgiveness or mercy. Or it could be a restoration of peace. Now, why did it survive? Why is this the only one to survive? And it's kind of like the tomb of King Tut. It was the only tomb to survive, and it's really just by a fluke of history. And this one is the only one to survive because of a fluke of history. When the Christians became rulers, they started looking around at all these pagan statues and these rulers that worshiped pagan gods, and they destroyed a lot of the art. And with the bronze, they would have melted, cut it up, and melted it down, and made other things with it. So, and that's what they did with the sculptures and the equestrian sculptures that they found in Rome. But they did not melt this one down because they thought that this was a different Roman emperor. He looks a lot like Constantine, right? There's some reason that they thought that this was Emperor Constantine and not Emperor Marcus Aurelius. So, because they thought it was Constantine, that is the reason why they did not destroy it. Constantine, the reason why they like Constantine, as I'll tell you guys later, is that he was the emperor that made Christianity legal, so they liked him. One thing I want to point out: look at his legs and the size of the horse and where his legs are. Does that seem odd to you? Does it seem like the horse is maybe a little bit small and he's a little bit big on the horse? All right. Yeah, there's a bit of a scale difference there. But when you're looking at it from this point of view, it looks quite normal. Oh, yeah, and also an equestrian sculpture is a symbol of power. That horse that he's riding is not a horse. He's riding Rome. He's in control of Rome. The horse is Rome. All right, Marcus Aurelius was the last of the good emperors. The reason why the five good emperors were so good is that because they were chosen to be emperor because of their skill. They were because they showed good leadership qualities, they were chosen to be leaders. That's how it should be. You choose people to you like it's almost like a hiring process. You know that when you want to hire somebody to be an employee, you interview them and you choose the best ones to work in your company, and therefore your company will be good. But when you start putting people in positions that are your friends and you choose them because they're your friends or family members, not because they're good at what they do, that's called nepotism. And that's when companies start getting bad workers in their ranks because they're choosing friends over competent people. It happens a lot in government. So Commodus was chosen because he was the son of Marcus Aurelius. And he was a bad emperor. Lots of attempts on his life by those close to him. He did not pay attention to the business of Rome. And when things got bad, he executed lots of people instead of fixing the problems, senators and those close to him. He believed he was Romulus, reincarnated. He renamed Rome to Colonia Commodiana, and he declared himself a god. He also claimed to be the reincarnation of Hercules. He's the reincarnation of Romulus and Hercules. So he had the Senate give him the title Hercules Romanus. And he became a gladiator and participated in fights, but the fights were rigged. He paid himself $2 million before each fight, and he was the highest paid gladiator of all time. Finally, he was assassinated. Right? This is the beginning of the really bad emperors. All right. So, like I said, he declared himself that he was a reincarnation of Hercules, and he portrayed himself as Hercules. Here he is wearing the lion skin, holding the olive club, holding the golden apples of the Hesperides. Below him, there are two cornucopias showing that he is bringing lots of abundance to Rome, but that is a complete lie. And then below that, he has the globe carved with zodiac signs. And the zodiac signs refer to Taurus, Capricorn, and Scorpio, which were important months for Commodus. Taurus? All right. Uh, another Roman emperor was Caracalla, and he too was a terrible emperor. And on this one, look at the face on him. Once again, we're going back to having that short military style haircut. We're shaving our beards, so he looks like he is in the military. He is no longer having the shaggy hair and the beard that is like a philosopher. All right, so gone are the kind philosophers, and now we're starting to get the militaristic emperors in. Um, on this one, well, the most famous thing that Caracalla did is that he created the Roman baths, or he did not create the Roman baths, but one of the buildings that he built is an amazing and over the top and absolutely huge Roman baths. So that's his claim to fame. Um, but he ordered multiple massacres against people. He had a very ruthless personality. He had his brother, his wife, and his father in law murdered. He made every free man in the empire a citizen just so that he could collect taxes from them. He was assassinated in his sixth year. And but I want to show how he is looking over his shoulder. It shows a little bit of suspicion and a little bit of paranoia in these later emperors that we begin to get a lot of assassinations and assassination attempts, and so you can see the suspicion in his eyes, and as he turns his head to look behind himself. He portrayed himself also as Hercules as a child. Uh, Hera wanted to kill Hercules, so she sent these two snakes into his crib, and he wrestled the snakes and killed them. Like I said, he created the baths of Caracalla, these absolutely huge baths, and this is where they found the weary Hercules. Look at the body type of Hercules, and then if you look at some of the mosaics that are in the baths, you can see that same body type. So I'm introducing this to you so that we can see that the body types of these emperors start to get quite large and husky and um, like almost like Hulk like. All right, so that finishes us for the High Empire. So we are finishing part 3 of 4 in chapter 7. Is that right? All right. So let's go on to part 4 of 4 for chapter 7. Whoops. Part 4. The Late Empire. All right, so much art history, never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We are still in chapter 7. We're going to do part 4, and it is the art of the late empire. We ignored the monarchy. We looked at the republic. We looked at the early empire and the high empire. So we are now going to step into the late empire. And as we go into the late empire, we're going to get into these lots of really bad emperors. And if you look at this timeline, this goes from 235 to 284. So roughly, we're talking about a 50-year period with a bunch of emperors. So Maximinius Thrax served 3 years before he was assassinated. Gordian did not even finish his first year, and he was committed suicide. Balbinus, this guy, assassinated. This guy, assassinated. Gordian died in battle. Philip died in battle. Trajan Decius, this is not the same Trajan that we studied, died in battle. Trebonianus was assassinated. Over here, Valerian died in an eastern prison. Gallienus, assassinated. Claudius, plague, assassinated, died in battle, assassinated. All right, this is a very troublesome time. And I'm going to explain why it's like this. Basically, Rome is so large that you have to have different armies to govern it all. You can't just have one army and one ruler over all of it. It's just too big. So different armies are in charge of different places. And the armies really love their general, and they say, "Hey, you should be the emperor." So they'll march in on Rome. Imagine if at Washington D.C., the army of North Dakota marches in and says, "I want the governor of North Dakota to be president," and so they take over, and the governor of North Dakota becomes president. Well, not everybody likes that. He gets assassinated. Then they bring in another emperor and another. So it works like that. A lot of these emperors are generals and commanders of armies, and so it's a very chaotic time. So general after general declared emperor by their troops, and then they were murdered by other troops and other generals and senators and political enemies. So, like I said, Rome consisted of different armies. The armies revolted, proclaimed their own general as emperor, and it was a very politically unstable time to live. Most assassinations were carried out by the Praetorian Guard, which is the elite soldiers in Rome that are supposed to guard the emperor. Well, they got so powerful that they had their own ideas of who should be emperor and who shouldn't. So they would put in their own people as the emperor. Okay, so during this time, there's a lot of chaos, and so not a lot of monumental architecture gets built. However, so we're not going to be seeing a lot of amazing architecture, but there is a lot of portraiture because there's so many generals becoming emperors, and there's such a vast change of emperors that we get a lot of portraits of the emperors. Because of the stability, no monumental architecture was constructed during this time. So the first one that we're going to look at is Maximinus Thrax. Maximinus Thrax had a humble beginning, but he was a huge man. He had enormous physical strength and height. Some people say that he had gigantism, like that guy right there. And he propelled up through the ranks, and he had a very intense personality. Very typical of the soldier emperor is that he has that short hair and no beard. And there's no real eye contact, as if he's lost in thought. We're looking at the one on the right. And he is disengaged from his surrounding environment. He has a distressed look on the soldier emperor's face. There's a distressed look on the soldier emperor's faces. And I talked about the haircut. The reason why they have short hair is the same reason, like in The Walking Dead, that she had shaved her head so that the zombies could not grab onto the hair. All right, moving on. I wanted you to know this term, the soldier emperor. Like I said, these emperors are generals that are put in place by their armies. And these generals are liked by their armies because they were once soldiers themselves. So they started out as soldiers. They rose up through the ranks by being badasses, and their troops love them. So they put them in position. But then they are terrible emperors, or they create lots of political enemies because they are put in a rushed manner. So we get lots of these different ones. This Trajan Decius, if you look at his face, he has a very worried or sad look on his face. He looks like an old man, and he has this nervous anxiety on his face. So instead of a virile emperor persecuting Christians, we have a sad old man. Trebonianus uh, Gaius has a rather large build or frame. So it looks like the body of a wrestler. And that's to show how strong he is and how large he is. He's a larger than life heroic nude, is what we have here. He's wearing military boots and a cloak, but no other clothes. And that emphasizes the bulk and the girth of his power. He has a wrestler's body. He has massive legs, swollen trunk, and that dwarfs the head. Kind of like what we saw in the Baths of Caracalla. And there's different kinds of athletes. Some athletes are very thin, and some athletes are very bulky. And the Greek and the early Roman Empire was modeled on the thinner athletes, but this late Roman Empire and the Hellenistic Greek were modeled on the latter type of athlete that is more like that of a wrestler. Or you can make it, they're trying to give the sense that they are very hulkish and strong like the Hulk. And one thing I want you to notice about this guy is that the hair is not carved out of his head, it's carved into his head. I want you to know what a sarcophagus is. We looked at the sarcophagus in Egypt. We skipped over the sarcophagus in Etruscan, but and this is the sarcophagus this is a Roman sarcophagus. These would have held a body on the inside. Basically, we're looking at a very fancy coffin. So the Egyptian sarcophagus would have held a mummy, the Etruscan would have held ashes, and the Romans held bodies. All right, so we're going to look at the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus. I'm not a big fan of Roman art, but this is a piece that I really love, and it is my favorite piece of Roman art. What I love about this is just how much energy in it there is. It reminds me of like when you kick over an ant pile and all the ants come out and they start writhing around. That's what this looks like. So this shows the a battle between the Romans and the barbarians. And in this relief sculpture, it is difficult to know where one body ends and another begins. In the top center, we have a hero. He is riding on a horse right there. And he's coming in on a horse. And we forget that this is a static piece of rock as everybody looks like they're moving around. There's a term that I wanted to introduce you guys to, and it is called horror vacui. Horror vacui is the fear of empty spaces. So when you see artwork that is just absolutely filled, every inch of the artwork is filled, there's no negative space, no empty space, that is horror vacui. All right, moving in closer on this, we have a very deep relief, and it shows a very high skill in carving. And what I'm absolutely amazed by this is if you imagine that somebody has a chisel and a hammer and they're chiseling into this. To get into these grooves, you have to have that, you can't be just like doing like, you have to get way in there, but this would be in your way. I just think it's amazing skill that the artist would have used in order to make these really deep cuts and the sculpture on underneath. It's not like you can sculpt the bottom part of it and then have another piece on top of it. It doesn't work like that in stone. So to me, this is an amazing skill in this work of art. Another thing that amazes me, I told you guys that the reason why arms and heads and legs are missing in sculptures is because that when you get to really thin parts of the stone, it breaks off. And then here's an example that rain right there should have broken off quite easily, but it's still there. You can see where some parts have broken off, like this hoof right there has broken off. Once again, I just think it's amazing. And I'm looking at these, I'm showing you these pictures from an angle so you can really see just how deep the sculpture is. I want to point out something on its forehead. It's very difficult to see in a regular photograph. And so I did some editing on the photo and I exaggerated the contrast. And you can see an X carved on his forehead. And that is a reference, a symbol of the Mithras, the Persian god of light. And so there was a cult, a religion called Mithraism, and which is very similar to Christianity. It promised eternal salvation after death. And it has also been said that Christianity is an evolution of Mithraism or Mithraism. So they carved an X on the forehead as a symbol of that cult. But that also reminded me of Charles Manson, who carved an X on his forehead. I don't know if you know who Charles Manson is. He was a serial killer, or he got others to do his killing for him. He was a cult leader, and he was arrested and put in prison. And he lived a very long life in prison. And there's lots of interviews of him, and he is just absolutely crazy as they come. But he put an X on his forehead because he felt like he had been X'd out of society. All right, I'm going to skip past the sides of the battle sarcophagus because they're kind of boring, but I want to look at right here. The Romans have portrayed themselves as idealistic, and they portrayed the barbarians as cartoonish and oafish. If you can see the guy in the lower right, his forehead, his eyebrows are very Neanderthals. Yes, thank you. All right. Uh, they're very Neanderthal type foreheads, and the nose is the big nose that that the Neanderthals would have had. So it was they're cartoonish and oafish. So it's a bit of propaganda to show the Romans in good light and the barbarians in a bad light. We are out of here in 2 more minutes, so we will stop right here. All right, so here's the plan. We are going to finish Unit 2 most likely on Tuesday. We will review for the test on Wednesday. We will take the test on Thursday and Friday, and that'll be next week. And then we will start either Unit 3 or Unit 4 on the following week. Are there any questions about anything?